I am delighted to be joined today with Dave McMaster, the founding director of the American School of Bahrain. Dave, it's so good to be with you again.
Charlie, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So we'll start with, how would you describe the role of an education leader?
Well, if I look at the K-12 sector, I would say what comes to mind are three things that are important for an educational leader in 2023. First, you have to be a change agent and you have to be adaptive. Schools are notorious for doing things that they've done 50 and 100 years ago, and that simply doesn't work anymore. So you have to convince people that change is good. Secondly, you really need to be an outstanding recruiter. The research is really clear that the best schools, the highest quality schools, have outstanding teachers that work with students. So it's my job, and it's every leader's job in K-12 school, to be a great recruiter and just as importantly, retain those excellent teachers. And lastly is to set the tone. We're very lucky at ASB that we are a new school. We're going into our fourth year. We started with a blank canvas. And we could set the tone, a tone of happiness, of engagement, of a sense of safety, and a place where students can take risks. So those are the three areas that come to mind.
What, in your opinion, is the key to providing enriching learning experience to students at ASB?
There are so many ways to enrich the learning experience for students, and the way not to do it is how we may have done it 20 and 30 years ago. I often talk to my teachers and say, don't teach like I was taught. Don't teach like you were taught, because the skills and the qualities that these students need are very different. I really do think that to enrich, you need to be able to set a tone where students can take risks with their learning, that there's very much a sense of safety in the class, that they can answer and be wrong or try and be wrong and fail. And as a leader, I need to allow teachers to do the same thing. If teachers are going to enrich the learning environment, I have to allow the teachers to take risks with their learning. I'm not interested in teachers who come with 10 years of lesson plans that have worked every year. I'm interested in those who are going to take risks and try new things. That in itself will enrich learning.
You mentioned about not teaching the way when you were taught and also being adaptive. You make it sound very easy. How do you keep on top of trends and keep ahead of the curve?
It's actually not easy at all. And technology and AI are two prime examples. But I think one, as a leader, I have to be well-read. I have to understand that I'm going to be, and every leader has to be, in a sense of moving outside of your comfort zone and letting staff know that it's okay to move outside their comfort zone, because it's not easy. Schools are not agents of change. It's easy to do the same thing again. To allow for risk-taking, I have to model that myself. And as somebody who's been doing this for 34 years and 30 years as a leader, I have to move into a zone that's not comfortable for me and model that for my teachers.
What are some of the innovations at your institution that promote quality education?
Well, when I first think of innovation, I automatically think of technology, but it's much more than that in the K-12 sector, even though technology's had a significant impact. And teachers need to innovate in terms of their pedagogical approaches, the way they approach literacy and numeracy. And I think one of the keys is to look at the way they assess. Traditionally, schools, not only K-12, but universities and post-secondary, look at assessment as an accumulation of knowledge. You sit, you get the information, and then you plane on a test if you understand it. But that's not innovation. Innovation is looking at different types of summative ways of assessing knowledge, of assessing whether they understood the process, really allowing students to show their understanding through summative assessments and much more impactful ways that's going to help them learn for lifelong learning.
Technology and artificial intelligence, which you briefly mentioned earlier, are changing the world. How do you feel that they're changing education?
If I look at just technology before we talk about AI, technology, when I got into teaching in the early 90s is when we first started using the internet. Between that and 30-something years later, technology had a greater impact on education than anything else in the last probably 100 years. The greatest thing it's done is it's forced educators to think differently, to approach what they're doing as teachers differently, and to allow students to think differently. It does not drive the curriculum. The curriculum drives the technology, but it has allowed us to differentiate, to allow different modes of learning and assessment for different types of students. In terms of AI, I feel similar to when I first started teaching and when technology was having an impact. that there's this deep breath of unknowingness. But if we're going to do our students any sort of educational service, we really have to get on board and understand there's going to be some things that work really well for us and some that don't. But AI also is going to force teachers to individualize the students' learning and give them the opportunity so that we're not teaching to the middle, that we're teaching all the way through.
Can you describe a recent student success story from ASB?
We've been really fortunate. Our first 3 years have gone better than we could have ever anticipated. And we've learned a lot of things that we will not do anymore or that we will change. But we've had some great successes. The most recent success is a group of grade 10 and 11 students, mostly grade 11s, that participated in the InJazz company program.
Oh, yeah.
First time we've ever been involved. We were a little nervous about it, and we had a group of students very interested. And it is a great example. When you ask about change, when you ask about innovation, when you ask about enriching, that is a program that demands all of that. These students start with a concept, and our students were very much on their own because it was new for us. So they really had to take the bull by the horns and take this project forward. They had to come up with a concept. They had to pitch that concept. They had to market it. They had to sell it, and they had to hire and fire their own peers.
Oh, wow.
It was real world stuff, and they went through some ups and downs. There were times they just wanted to throw in the towel. There were times they thought this is the best thing we've ever done. And it was a 6 to 8 month process. It was the epitome of true learning. That process changed them as students. The greatest thing out of all of it was that it was a great learning experience. They ended up in about 50 schools, down to 10. So they were the top school in all of Bahrain.
Right.
And going in with very low expectations, knowing that it's the first time that if they have a great time and they learn something, then we're going to get something out of this. But it was a real moment and a real significant milestone for us at the school.
I think that is one of the best ways to learn is through experience and doing things like that.
Yeah. And you'll see that at ASB from the time students are 2 or 3 years old till they're grade 12 graduates. Long past is the idea that the teacher stands at the front and teaches, and they learn and they show what they've learned. Hands-on, assuming responsibility for their learning, taking action themselves, learning to fail along the way, learning it's okay to fail. These are all aspects of the learning process at ASB, and you're right, hands-on, and that's what they're going to see in the real world, in a world that's going to change rapidly between now and the time they reach the work world.
What was the best thing that happened to you when you were a student?
I would say the best thing that happened to me was something that I thought was the worst thing that happened to me, and I was in grade 7, and my teacher, Mr. Sandberg, who pulled me aside just before the winter break and showed me a class list for I was in grade 6, and he showed me the class list for grade 7 and asked what I thought. I said, well, what do you mean I thought? What do I think? That's not my class. He goes, well, if you keep doing what you're doing, which is nothing, then you will not be in grade 7 next year. And it hit me for the first time ever. I thought as a typical adolescent boy, I go to school, I learn, I do what I need to do. But it really was a lesson for me that I better take school a little more seriously. I can still enjoy it. And just that conversation and the one he had following that with my parents changed me as a student. And it was probably the best thing. I was not the top student. I was a very good student. I had a pretty good high school career. But that changed the way I thought. It was a real life moment where he changed the way I thought about education and my own education.
It's funny how things, memories, how things that were once tough conversations that you didn't like at the time, you're thankful for later because you learned from them, right?
Hugely. In fact, ironically, that gentleman who was my grade 6 teacher ended up being my reference on my first 3 jobs. And I think a lot of back to that when I have to have tough conversations with teachers, when something's not going well, when they're struggling, and it's a conversation that most people don't want to have. And I think back to something like that, thinking, you know what, the good that came out of that tough conversation is well worth the pain and suffering you go through, probably mentally and emotionally at the time, because in the end, it's what's best.
Dave, it's always good to catch up with you and hear from your side, and thank you very much. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks, Charlie. I really enjoyed it too.